2019 may be almost over, but we're not quite done yet. October is promising some very interesting developments in the world of the Mac, and today we're going to talk about them. So, if you're anything like me, then Apple's September event isn't quite enough for you. New iPhones are great, new budget iPad, new Apple Watch with the always-on display, like that, not quite enough for me. I've always been one to sort of prefer the Mac, and that's why this channel kind of focuses on the Mac, if you hadn't guessed that already. But this year, we should be getting some pretty good upgrades. Now, Apple doesn't hold an October event every year, but they do it most years, and this year should be no exception. If you remember back to the 2018 October event, we got the current generation of iPad Pro, which was a major upgrade over the outgoing iPad Pro, and it represented a new design language. We also saw the MacBook Air get updated, which adopted the existing MacBook design language, and the Mac Mini was upgraded with some significant internal improvements, and also they painted it gray. It's not exactly a redesign, but it's gray. The most talked about product that we should expect to see in October is, of course, the coveted, the long-awaited, well, since February, 16-inch MacBook Pro. Now, this was something that we were all sort of blindsided by back in February when Ming-Chi Kuo said, oh, hey, by the way, also, we're gonna get a 16-inch MacBook Pro this year. And we were all kind of just like, what? Huh? But since then, rumors have been pouring out, everything from the display resolution all the way down to a new keyboard mechanism that's going to harken back to the scissor switch. Both of those, by the way, are really awesome because, let's face it, the MacBook Pro is a little bit long in the tooth. In my opinion, the existing generation of MacBook Pro is a handsome computer. I think they look fantastic. In fact, the only thing that I would really want to update from an aesthetic perspective would be the display bezels, and that's to be expected. Obviously, this design came out in 2016, so you'd expect to modernize it by slimming down the bezels a little bit more. And then, of course, there are the issues that this generation has had, namely thermals and keyboard. The keyboards suck. They're not good. They're very bad. And then, of course, there's the thermal issues. Now, the worst offender was, obviously, the 2018 MacBook Pro with the Core i9. That thing was a whole shenanigan. But let's face facts, even the lesser powered quad-core models from 2016 and 17, they're not that well cooled. Given all of these issues within the current generation, there have been some noticeable steps, especially on the 2019 models, to address some of these issues. If you have one of the 2016 MacBook Pros or even a 2015 MacBook with the original butterfly keyboard, and you go into an Apple store and you try out one of the new 2019 keyboards, you are going to be blown away. There is a huge amount of difference given the fact that the keyboards look exactly the same. The 15-inch MacBook Pro introduced this latest keyboard back in May, and then the 13-inch MacBook Pro and the MacBook Air joined it back in July. So it really hasn't been on the market in the hands of consumers for long enough to make really decisive claims about its long-term reliability. So I'm going to hold off on that, although it is definitely better than the previous 2016s. We also have improvements with the thermals. The 2019 8-core i9 MacBook Pro doesn't thermal throttle thanks to some clever fan curve and undervolting tricks and little techniques done by Apple there. But the long and the short of it is, no amount of revising is really going to get rid of these issues. We need a redesign. We need a different keyboard. And frankly, we need a different internal design with better cooling. Now, I'm not sure if that's going to require a thicker device. I personally wouldn't mind too much if it does, but it needs to happen. Also, and let me know if you guys have noticed this down in the comments below, but I've noticed that this existing generation of MacBook, the edges of the device, especially the space gray ones, scratch kind of easily, and they're very obvious. MacBooks are aluminum. They're going to scratch, they're going to dent if you don't have them in a case. But it seems like this generation is more susceptible to showing these cosmetic defects than previous versions were. So perhaps a new design, something that's a little bit reminiscent of the iPad Pro, the 2018 iPad Pro, I could see that as working really well. Now, the iPad Pro basically had a more squared off design, but the edges were rounded ever so slightly, which definitely reduces those issues. The existing MacBooks have squared off corners, and those are pretty easy to scratch and dent. Now, as far as the hardware that this new 16-inch MacBook Pro is going to be running, we can obviously expect some significant display improvements, new resolution, larger size, probably a higher dynamic range. In fact, something that I've been mulling over since like June, I think that it's going to be called the MacBook Pro XDR. We just saw the iPhone 11 with this like XDR branding added onto it that they took from the Pro display. So I would be not at all surprised if this wasn't like, oh, the new 16-inch MacBook Pro, but the new MacBook Pro XDR. I mean, sue me, but it's a catchier name than iPhone 11 Pro Max. So the area that I'm worried about is the internals. We just had a 15-inch MacBook Pro refresh back in May, and I'm a little bit worried that the MacBook Pro XDR is going to have the exact same specs. I think what it would do is probably have the exact same specs as the upper tier, so an 8-core i9, 16 gigs of RAM, half terabyte SSD, Radeon Pro 560X, that sort of thing. And it would basically just be the exact same specs, but with this new design, new display, new keyboard, all that stuff, and probably start at like $32.99, something like that. That's what I'm a little bit worried about. Personally, I would hope that at the very, very least, they would make the Vega graphics a standard option, because like, come on, why are we still having Polaris graphics as standard in 2019? That's just ridiculous. Alright, so what other Macs should we expect? Well, the Mac Pro. Now obviously this has already been revealed and we already know a lot about it, but I expect that it's probably going to launch at this event. They'll probably recap it and be like, oh, by the way, remember this guy? The little Mac Pro, the cheese grater fella? Well, here it is, and now you can buy it. So that's probably going to happen at this event. I don't think they're going to dedicate a whole lot of time at the event itself to sort of rehash what they've already talked about. But ooh man, that base model Mac Pro, whew. I'm kind of holding out hope that they're going to increase the base specifications a little bit. It's just a sliver of hope, but please, because okay. For $6,000, we're getting an 8-core Xeon, which is probably going to be pretty similar to a Core i9 9900K in terms of performance. We're talking about 32 gigabytes of RAM, 256 gigabyte SSD. Are you kidding? Are you insane? And then Radeon Pro 580X graphics. That's ridiculous. And granted, I understand the Mac Pro is meant to be upgraded upon. If you're buying one of those machines, you're gonna be putting in more RAM. You're gonna be sticking in a better graphics card. Throw in a Radeon 7. Throw in 2 of them. Who knows? Put in some NVMe SSDs. Stick those bad boys in there. It's not gonna be left at bone stock, but either way, $6,000 is just so much money for that. It's crazy. So I'm mulling over whether or not I'm gonna get one of those to test on the channel, maybe do some upgrades. Can't imagine how expensive that would be, but we'll see what happens with that. So as far as other hardware announcements that we would be seeing at the event itself, I think it's very reasonable to expect a new iPad Pro, probably not a redesign, but some internal updates and maybe display technology and battery life increases sort of in line with the iPhone's 11. Stuff like that is probably going to happen at this event, but I don't think that there's going to be a focus on other Mac hardware. The iMac has been updated this year, so that's probably done for this year. The Mac Mini might get a minor spec bump, maybe. The MacBook Air definitely isn't getting anything because, frankly, Apple doesn't really update it all that often, and they updated it with True Tone and a lower price back in July. The 13 and 15-inch MacBook Pros were both updated pretty recently in May and July, so I don't expect any changes there. I personally think the 16-inch MacBook Pro is going to go on top of the existing lineup, at least for the time being. So I don't think we're going to see any real major hardware updates apart from the Mac Pro and the 16-inch MacBook Pro at this event. However, there is one possibility, which would be a new iMac Pro. The iMac Pro came out back in 2017 and it hasn't been touched ever since. So it's not unreasonable that we could see some sort of a hardware spec bump at this event. I don't think it's going to be anything major, but we could see some minor spec bumps like graphics or processors to sort of bring those up to date. So regardless of what happens, I think the 16-inch MacBook Pro or the MacBook Pro XDR is a sure bet. and the Mac Pro being released to the public is most likely going to happen as well, and both of those are very exciting. So I'm looking forward to this event, and I hope you guys are too. Let me know down in the comments below, what do you expect to see from the new MacBook Pro XDR? I'm pretty sure they're going to call it that. I'm just going to start calling it that. Let me know what you're most excited for, and as usual, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Please consider following me on Twitter at Luke Miani, and definitely consider checking out my subreddit. All of that stuff is linked down in the description below, and with that, I'll see you all in the next video.